My name is Ava Reynolds. I am 31 years old, and I own a growing cybersecurity company in Seattle. 4 years ago, my family cut me out of their lives. Yesterday, they walked straight into my company like nothing had happened. Then my mother demanded 50% of it. I smiled, and my answer left them speechless. But before I tell you what I said, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me which country you're watching from. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Most of my team was finishing meetings before the day ended. I was in my office reviewing a report when my assistant, Julia, knocked on the door. She looked confused. Ava, she said carefully, there are 3 people in the lobby asking for you. Clients. I asked. She shook her head. They said they're your family. For a moment, I just stared at her. My family. I hadn't heard that word in a long time. Who exactly? I asked. Julia hesitated. Your parents and a man who says he's your brother. The room suddenly felt smaller. 4 years of silence. 4 years without a call. And now they were sitting in my lobby. I stood up slowly. Send them to the conference room, I said. Julia nodded and left. I walked down the hallway toward the large glass conference room at the center of the office. My employees were working quietly at their desks, unaware that the 3 people who once erased me from their lives were now inside my building. When I reached the door, I paused for a second. Then I pushed it open. My mother, father, and my older brother Daniel were sitting around the table. They looked comfortable, like they belonged there. My father glanced around the room with interest. Nice place, he said when he saw me. Bigger than I expected. My mother gave me a quick smile. Hello, Ava. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Not bad for someone who couldn't run a business, he said with a small grin. I stayed near the door. You shouldn't be here, I said calmly. My father waved his hand like that didn't matter. We didn't come all this way to stand in the hallway. Sit down. I didn't move. What do you want? My mother sighed softly. Is that really how you're going to greet us after all this time? I looked at her. You disappeared from my life for 4 years, I said. You don't get to act surprised. Daniel rolled his eyes. Can we skip the drama? He said. We're here for business. That word made my stomach tighten. Business. My father reached into a folder sitting on the table. He pulled out a stack of papers and slid them across the table toward me. The sound of the paper sliding across the glass table echoed in the quiet room. Read that, he said. I didn't pick it up. What is it? My mother answered. A partnership agreement. I frowned. With who? Daniel smiled. With me. I looked from him to the papers. You want a partnership with my company? That's right, he said. My startup and your company will combine resources. It's a perfect opportunity. I laughed softly. You walked into my company uninvited after 4 years to ask for half of it. Daniel leaned forward. Not ask, he said. My mother suddenly pushed the papers harder across the table. They stopped right in front of me. Her voice turned cold. Sign them. I stared at her. What? Sign over 50% of your company to Daniel, she said flatly. For a second, I thought I had heard wrong. Then my father spoke. Your brother's company needs support right now, he explained. If investors see that your business is connected to his, it will stabilize things. I slowly picked up the papers. 50% ownership transfer. My company. The company I had spent years building. You think I'm just going to give him half of this? I asked quietly. Daniel shrugged. You wouldn't have this without the family name anyway. I looked up. Really? My mother leaned closer across the table. Her voice dropped lower. You're going to sign it, she said. Why? She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she spoke the words that explained everything. Because if you don't, she tapped the table with one finger. I'll call your biggest client tonight and tell them exactly what kind of person you really are. Silence filled the room. My largest client was a global company. Losing them would damage my business badly. My father watched my reaction carefully. You built something impressive here, he said calmly. But businesses depend on trust. Daniel smirked. And if your biggest client stops trusting you, he spread his hands. That company of yours won't last very long. I slowly set the papers back on the table. For years ago, they called me a failure. For years ago, they erased me from their lives. And now they had walked into my office to take half of what I built. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I did the last thing they expected. I smiled. All right, I said quietly. My mother blinked. What? I said all right. I repeated. Let's talk about the partnership. Daniel's smirk grew wider. He leaned back in his chair again. See, he said to my parents. I told you she'd understand. But none of them noticed something important. I wasn't smiling because they had won. I was smiling because I already knew something they didn't. And that knowledge was about to change everything. I looked at the three people sitting across from me, my mother, my father, and my older brother, Daniel. For years. 4 years without a call. 4 years without a message. And now they were sitting in my conference room demanding half of my company. My father tapped the papers on the table again. So, he said, you understand the situation. Daniel leaned back in his chair like he already owned the place. This is actually a great opportunity for you too, he said. Our companies working together will make both of us stronger. I studied his face for a moment. That same confident smile. The same one he had the night everything fell apart between us. For years ago, Daniel and I had actually started a small company together. Back then it was just an idea, a cybersecurity system I had been building for months. I wrote the code. I designed the software. Daniel handled meetings and investors. At first, everything seemed fine. When people asked about the system, Daniel would introduce me as the technical expert. But slowly things started changing. Whenever investors praised the idea, Daniel began speaking like the entire project belonged to him. At first I thought it was just excitement. Then one day I walked into a meeting early and heard him talking to a group of investors. This whole system was my concept, Daniel told them confidently. My sister helped build it, but the vision was mine. I remember standing there, frozen. He didn't even realize I was listening. After the meeting, I confronted him in the hallway. Why did you tell them that? I asked. He shrugged. It sounds better. It's not true. Ava, relax, he said. Investors want a clear leader. That doesn't mean you lie. He rolled his eyes. Everyone exaggerates a little in business. But the story kept growing. Soon he wasn't just exaggerating. He was telling everyone the company was completely his idea. And somehow our parents started believing it too. One night we all sat in my parents' living room arguing about it. You're taking credit for my work, I told Daniel. He laughed like the whole thing was ridiculous. You're overreacting. I turned to my parents. Tell him he's wrong. But my father just sighed. Ava, your brother is trying to build a real business. Why are you attacking him? I stared at him. Because it's my system. My mother crossed her arms. Daniel has always been better at business, she said. You should support him instead of competing with him. I felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. So you believe him? I asked. My father shook his head like I was being unreasonable. You're good with computers, he said. But Daniel understands how the real world works. Daniel leaned back on the couch, smiling. See, he said. They get it. Something inside me broke that night. If that's what you believe, I said quietly, then I'm done. The next morning I left the company. I thought maybe after some time my family would realize what really happened. Maybe they would call. Maybe they would ask for my side of the story. They didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. No phone calls. No messages. Nothing. It was like I had stopped existing to them. So, I built my life without them. I worked small freelance jobs, long nights, endless coding. Slowly, I built a new system. A better one. Eventually, that project turned into the company I was running today. And now the same people who erased me were sitting across from me asking for half of it. I pushed the papers gently back toward them. If we're going to do this, I said calmly, we should do it properly. Daniel frowned slightly. What does that mean? A partnership between companies isn't something decided in a private conversation. My father looked confused. Then how is it decided? With a formal meeting, I said. My leadership team. Senior employees. A few advisors. Daniel thought about that for a second. Then he nodded. Fine. My mother looked relieved. That's good, she said. If everyone hears about the partnership at the same time, it will look much stronger. Daniel smiled again. Exactly. I stood up from my chair. We're having a company meeting tonight, I said. You can present the partnership there. My father stood as well. Perfect. Daniel picked up the papers from the table. So, tonight we make it official. I walked them toward the office exit. Before stepping into the elevator, Daniel turned back to me. You know, he said with a confident grin, family always wins in the end. I smiled politely. See you tonight, I said. The elevator doors closed. And for the first time since they arrived, I finally allowed my smile to grow wider. Because Daniel had just said something very interesting. See you tonight. Not next week. Not later. Tonight. Which meant he had no idea what was about to happen. That evening, the conference hall of my company was full. All the main investors were there, along with several department managers and our legal team. And, of course, my parents. They arrived early. My father walked into the room like he already owned the place, while my mother sat beside him, whispering something proudly. And Daniel? Daniel looked completely confident, laughing and shaking hands with people like he was already the new partner. When I walked in, the room slowly became quiet. I smiled politely and took my seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," I said calmly. "This meeting is about an important partnership decision." My father immediately leaned forward. "Yes," he said loudly, "a partnership that will secure this company's future." Several investors exchanged curious looks. Daniel opened his folder and pushed a set of papers across the table. "The agreement is simple," he said. "My company will invest capital and experience. In exchange, I receive 50% ownership." My mother nodded proudly. "It's a very generous offer," she said, "and Ava would be foolish to refuse." The room stayed quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting. I slowly picked up the papers, turned a few pages, and then placed them back on the table. "You're right," I said. "It is a generous offer." Daniel smiled. My father relaxed in his chair. But then I added something else. "That's why I wanted tonight's meeting to be very transparent." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands calmly. "It means before we sign anything, I want everyone here to understand exactly who they're partnering with." Daniel laughed lightly. "Of course," he said. "I welcome that." My father waved his hand impatiently. "Ava, don't drag this out," he said. "Just sign the agreement." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "First we need to review something." Then I turned slightly toward the door. "Emma," I said, "please bring them in." The door opened, and two people walked into the room, a tall man in a dark suit and a woman carrying a laptop. Daniel's smile disappeared instantly. My father frowned. "Who are they?" he asked. I looked around the room. "These," I said calmly, "are financial auditors." Daniel immediately stood up. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. The auditor ignored him and placed a thick folder on the table. "I'm afraid it is," the man said. My mother looked annoyed. "Ava, what kind of stunt is this?" I looked straight at Daniel. "You asked for 50% of my company," I said. "So, I did a full background check." Daniel forced a laugh. "Well, that's smart business." "Yes," I said. "It is." The woman connected her laptop to the large screen on the wall. Numbers appeared, company names, bank transfers. Daniel's confidence started fading. My father leaned forward. "What are we looking at?" he asked. The auditor spoke calmly. "These are records from Daniel's previous businesses." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "This meeting is over," he said. But the auditor continued. "3 companies," he said, "all closed within 2 years." My mother frowned. "That doesn't mean anything." The auditor nodded. "You're right." Then he opened another document. "But moving investor money to personal accounts does." The room froze. Daniel's face turned pale. My father looked shocked. "What?" he said. The screen changed again. A transfer record appeared. $2 million, the woman said. Transferred to an offshore account. Daniel grabbed his folder. "We're leaving," he said quickly. But before he could reach the door, 2 security guards stepped inside. The room went silent. I leaned back calmly. "You're not leaving yet," I said. Daniel looked at me with anger. "You set this up," he whispered. I nodded. "Yes." My father looked completely confused. "Ava, what is going on?" I answered slowly. "The man you brought here to take half my..."